My name is Ethan Cole. I served as a federal park ranger in Wyoming for just over 14 years, posted primarily out of Dubois, working the western corridor of Shoshone National Forest, a stretch of rugged terrain that borders Yellowstone to the west and claws its way through glacial valleys, dense pine corridors, and cliffs older than memory. I didn't take the job for the money. You don't become a ranger because you want a desk. You do it because there's something about the silence, the way nature speaks when no one else does. You do it because the land has a rhythm, and when you're out there long enough, you begin to understand it. Every gust of wind, every shift in the underbrush, every stillness between sounds, it all means something. But in early June of 2019, that rhythm broke. It started with a call, routine really. A hiker reported what they thought was an animal graveyard, said it looked like a pile of ancient turtle shells, cracked wide open and scattered across a narrow ravine near Dead Horse Gulch. Now, Dead Horse Gulch isn't on any official trail map. Most locals know to steer clear, not because it's marked dangerous, but because of something else, something harder to name. Hunters say game avoid the region entirely. Trackers have gone in and found boot prints that circle back, only to vanish mid-stride. It's the kind of place other rangers joke about, until they're assigned there. That morning, I hiked out solo, brought the usual kit, flare gun, sat radio, hydration pack, sidearm, flare dye. Expected to find maybe a bear den or a coyote feeding spot. What I found wasn't made by any animal I know. The forest felt wrong before I even saw the site. The air was heavy, still, not quiet in the usual sense. There just weren't any sounds, no bird song, no insects. Even the wind didn't move right. It was as if the entire landscape had paused, waiting. I followed a game trail down a slope that ended abruptly at a strange depression in the earth, about 30 feet across and unnaturally circular. Not an erosion crater, no sign of a rock slide. It looked peeled back. The topsoil had been removed down to a smooth bed of gray clay. And at the center, shells. That hiker hadn't been lying. They weren't bones. These things were oval-shaped, about 2 feet across, almost like carapaces. But they weren't turtle shells. I'd seen enough to know the difference. These were thin, translucent in parts, and warm. Still warm, like whatever had been inside had only recently left. And here's where things began to tilt. Each shell had been cracked in the exact same pattern, a narrow split down the center, then spread outward, not chewed, not crushed, opened, as if something had emerged, willingly. I radioed it in. Base, this is Cole. I'm at quadrant 12, -72 elevation. Found something unusual, shells, dozens. Some fossilized, but warm to the touch. I don't know what it is. Requesting advisement. No response. Static. Tried again. Still nothing. And then, from the tree line to the west, movement. Fast, too fast. I caught a glimpse of something darting low across the forest floor. Could have been a cougar. But it didn't move like one. It didn't run. It slid, as if its limbs weren't meant for walking but for swimming, through dirt. I raised my binoculars. Nothing. I turned back toward the pit, and that's when I saw it. The earth was moving. The clay floor at the center of the depression had started to pulse, slowly, rhythmically. A subtle rise and fall, like a heartbeat, or breathing. I stepped back. Then I heard it, under my feet. A deep, resonant thud. Not sound, exactly. More like a pressure wave. Something vast, shifting far below, and from within that pulse, a whisper. Not out loud. In my head, a name. My name. It didn't speak it. It knew it. I don't remember running. I don't remember drawing my sidearm. The next thing I knew, I was 5 miles north, alone on a ridge, my boots caked in mud I couldn't identify. I had bite marks on my left hand, deep, but not animal. The spacing was too wide, and my radio was gone. That night, I built a fire and stayed awake till dawn. The sky never felt darker. I kept seeing things on the edge of the light, shapes that blinked in and out of focus. Not eyes, not figures. Impressions of something watching from behind the trees. And then, just before sunrise, I heard it again. The whisper. Only this time, it wasn't in English. When I made it back to the station, I filed my report. They flagged it for review, told me not to mention it to other personnel. The next day, a black SUV showed up with no plates. 2 men in Park Service uniforms that didn't match our standard issue asked to review the coordinates. I gave them what I had. They never came back. 3 days later, that section of the forest was closed off. The official reason? Rock instability, landslide risk. Except there was no landslide, no seismic activity, nothing. It's just erasure. When I returned to the gulch 2 weeks later, everything was gone. The shells, the crater, the trees even looked different, like they'd been replanted or replaced. But here's the part no one expected. A Cherokee elder from the Wind River Reservation came to see me. Never met him before. Said he'd seen what I found before I found it. In dreams. He told me our land rests on bones far older than the tribes. Said there are places where things were buried, not just to contain them, but to keep them forgotten. Because remembering is a kind of invitation. And what I stepped into wasn't a nest, it was a vault, and it had been opened. He called it the Hollow Cradle, a place where ancient things come to rest before they rise again. Said the ground beneath Wyoming holds not just fossils, but memory. And sometimes, memory can stir. He ended with one sentence I've never forgotten. His voice didn't shake when he said it. He wasn't afraid. He was resigned. It's open now, and it remembers who sealed it. Narrator, pause. They reassigned me, told me to take extended leave. Said I was suffering from heat stress, maybe early onset hallucinations from exposure. But I know what I saw, and I wasn't the first, because in the ranger logs, buried under old incident files, I found a matching report, dated 1963. Same region, same shells, same outcome. Ranger never came back. This is only the beginning. There are patterns like this all over North America. Hidden in tribal memory, whispered in ranger cabins, dismissed as myth. But they point to something ancient, something we keep waking up, without knowing it. That's what we're doing here on MindFuel. Uncovering the stories they erased, reconstructing what's left from the ones who dared to speak. If you think folklore can't bleed into reality, you haven't heard what's coming next, so subscribe, come back. Because the next witness saw something crawl from that pit, and it was wearing a ranger's jacket. Before the ranger's file was sealed, before the soil was patched and the satellites scrubbed clean, before Ethan Cole stood trembling at the rim of a living crater in Shoshone Forest, there was a map, hand-drawn, ink on weathered elk hide, passed from hand to hand, father to son, medicine man to chosen speaker. It came not from cartographers, but from dreamers. Men like Elder Amos Tsali. Amos Tsali was one of the last traditional knowledge keepers of the eastern band of Cherokee in North Carolina. He lived at the base of Clingman's Dome, where the mist runs thick and the air carries weight older than scripture. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words didn't feel like stories. They felt like instructions. In 2020, a university anthropology team visited Amos to document residual oral traditions of the region. They wanted folk tales, campfire myths. Instead, he gave them something else entirely. He sat down, pulled a rolled hide from a cedar box, and unwrapped a map, not of roads or towns or rivers, but of veins. Deep cracks running under the land, places where the elders said the world was thinner, where things below the surface could hear footsteps, and remember what it meant to reach upward. He pointed to a spot just west of the Continental Divide. "They're nesting again," he said. The map had no legends, no distance markers, just symbols, etchings that looked like eyes without pupils. Beneath each, a single Cherokee word, scrawled with shaking hands, unexplained, the sleepers. The sleepers weren't spirits, not demons, not beasts. They were described as occupants, ancient entities that lived beneath the land like parasites hibernating inside a host, not alive in the way we understand it, not dead either, simply waiting. The stories say they came before the deer walked upright, before the rivers carved their paths, when the mountains were still soft, like bread rising in the earth. They found the deepest places and coiled into themselves, layered in dust, buried by time, held down by weight and silence. The elders called them the Forgotten Pulse, not because people forgot them, but because the land tried to. Sally's father once took him deep into the Nantahala, where no trail dared reach. They camped near an overgrown stone circle, moss blanketing what looked like a collapsed chimney. But it wasn't a chimney. It was an old marker, one of 7, all placed above sites the ancestors claimed had breathed without lungs. That night, his father told him, "If the ground splits under pine, run. Don't ask questions. Don't call for help. Run so fast your spirit forgets to follow." Sally remembered that phrase his whole life, until 2020, until the ground did exactly that, split during a 4.3 magnitude tremor in western Wyoming. Seismic reports from the U.S. Geological Survey noted the quake was shallow, far too shallow for its strength. No fault line, no aftershock, just a single rupture like a bubble bursting beneath the forest floor. When Sally saw the epicenter coordinates, he circled them in red on the hide, and beneath it, he wrote one word: awakened. When asked what that meant, Sally didn't speak for a long time. He looked toward the woods, not at them, through them. Then he whispered, "You can't kill what's waiting. You can only stop walking where it listens." He claimed the sleepers had no eyes, no mouths, but they could feel pressure, every footstep, every vibration, like sonar on wet skin. He said the shells the ranger found, they weren't remains. They weren't even the first. They were offspring, sheddings, the casing that crumbles once something old enough, hungry enough, finally crawls out. And those shells, they've appeared before, in Tennessee, in the Ozarks, in the highlands of North Carolina, where a hunter once vanished near a stream that turned black overnight. His boots were found half a mile away, pointing back the way he came, one still warm. The elders burned the map for years, then redrew it in secret. And every generation, one site gets marked again, because the nest breathes once more. There's something important, Sally said, buried in that interview transcript no one finished translating. It wasn't just a warning, it was a confirmation. We didn't make up the stories to scare children. We made up the stories so we wouldn't have to remember the truth. But now, the stories are moving again, and we've run out of names for what's waking up. When Cole radioed those final words, they weren't bones, they were shells. He wasn't making a discovery, he was making a confirmation. And back in North Carolina, over 1,500 miles away, an elder simply nodded and said, "It started. We've gathered stories like this across the country. Places the government quietly shuts down. Forests they blame on rockfall, campsites that vanish from maps, and maps that reappear when the ground starts throbbing beneath pine. If you're watching this, you need to know we're not chasing legends anymore. We're recording footprints, and the path they lead down doesn't end above ground. Subscribe to MindFuel now, because the next voice you'll hear comes from a ranger who followed Cole's trail and found something in the woods wearing his own face. Exactly 21 days after Ranger Ethan Cole transmitted his last radio call, another ranger disappeared, not in Shoshone. This time it happened just east of the Wind River Range, near a jagged bluff known by locals as Crowheart Butte, a place where history itself seems reluctant to stay buried. The man's name was Michael Redfern, age 39, 7-year veteran of the Wyoming Backcountry Patrol, level-headed, meticulous, known for logging more solo miles per season than anyone in his unit. His last assignment? A routine inspection of fencing near a boundary line that cuts across BLM land and edges onto territory considered sacred by the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. Crowheart Butte doesn't show up much on travel blogs. It's remote, stark, a knife-shaped ridge rising out of the desert floor like a warning, casting a shadow over the scrubland even at noon. Its name comes from a violent standoff between rival tribes over a century ago. But what's under the butte is something older, something tribal elders never put to words, at least not in English. When Redfern was dispatched, no one raised a flag. It was standard. Until his GPS tracker stopped transmitting, without warning, just before dusk. Narrator. They pulled the logs. His route had been clean and linear, until it wasn't. At 5:42 p.m., the dot froze. Latitude 43.2. Longitude -109.1. Elevation 5,706 feet, then nothing. No SOS, no signal loss, no error, just silence. A search team was sent the next morning, 12 in total, seasoned, armed, accompanied by 2 canines trained for deep terrain recovery. What they found? Not Redfern, not even his gear. What they found was a trail, but it didn't behave like a trail. It began with a patch of turned soil, roughly the size of a man lying down. Not dug up, not eroded, just pressed, as if someone or something had lain there long enough to imprint the ground. Around it, shards, glass, number something more fibrous, fragments shaped like segments of a shell, pale and brittle, clustered like petals, identical to what Ethan Cole described. The same sickening curvature, the same hairline splits along the edge. But here's where it breaks the pattern. Roughly 20 yards west, they found blood. A smear, dried and dark, but not scattered like from a wound. It had been drawn intentionally, 6 lines, radial, all pointing inward. And in the center, a boot, lodged heel down in the clay, still upright. Ranger Redfern's boot. His name still written on the inside collar. Laces untouched, tread clean, except for what looked like ash around the sole. The team reported the finding. Rangers prepared to escalate the search to air support. But then came the call. From above. 2 tribal advisors from Wind River arrived unannounced, Amos Tsali among them. He hadn't stepped foot near Crowheart Butte in over 30 years. He didn't ask to see the site. He simply said, he walked across the mouth. It wasn't open yet, but it smelled him. And then, calmly, he added, the others will come now. They always do after the first. When asked to explain, he turned and walked back toward his truck without another word. The official report listed Ranger Redfern as presumed deceased due to environmental exposure. The internal report tells a different story. A witness, one of the dog handlers, claimed his K9 began to tremble at the edge of the butte's north wall. Not growl, not alert, just shake, so violently that it had to be sedated. When the handler scanned the area with night vision, he saw impressions in the dirt, footprints, but not human, wide, long, with no arch, 6 toes, and the spacing? Inconsistent, as if whatever made them changed shape as it moved. The search was called off after just 48 hours, unprecedented for a ranger. The reason given? Safety concerns. Unofficially, the team received a message from regional management stating that all further investigations into the Crowheart site were suspended until geologic review could be conducted. That review never came. The GPS unit was later recovered, shattered into 6 clean fragments. Each fragment found laid out in a line stretching 20 feet from Redfern's boot, like breadcrumbs, or a trail. But no predator leaves trophies like that, unless it's not hunting for food, unless it's marking territory. In the days following Redfern's disappearance, 3 other incidents occurred along the outer perimeter of Shoshone. A game camera snapped at 2:11 a.m. recorded something tall and skeletal emerging from a cedar thicket, carrying a piece of uniform fabric. A hunter reported hearing his own name whispered back to him while hiking alone, despite not telling anyone he was in the area. And in one unconfirmed case, a poacher who ventured near the base of the butte returned with no memory of the previous 72 hours, and the word "listen" carved into the bark of a tree just outside his camp. No animals disturbed the site afterward, not even birds. Even now, years later, you can feel it in the air. Something opened its eyes beneath that ridge, and what it saw first was a man in uniform. This isn't a ghost story. It's a migration pattern. Something stirs under the oldest parts of North America. And the warnings weren't metaphor. They were maps, coordinates, schedules. And now they're sinking again. If you're still watching, understand this. The land remembers its trespassers, especially those who get too close to what should have stayed buried. We're not reporting disappearances anymore. We're tracking emergence. Subscribe to MindFuel, because in the next chapter we break open the restricted recordings from a recovered field cam. And in the last 30 seconds of footage, the voice captured on audio was not Ranger Redfern's, but it was saying his name from under the dirt. 2 weeks after Ranger Michael Redfern's disappearance, a backup crew was sent, but they weren't looking for him. Not anymore. They were sent to retrieve a device, a remote survey sensor embedded in the ridgeline just above Crowheart Butte, installed 5 years earlier to measure plate activity and low-frequency seismic resonance across the Wind River Formation. It had gone offline the same night Redfern vanished. What they found wasn't signal damage. It was stone, granite, specifically scarred, in a way no one on that team could explain. At 06:42 hours, a 2-man fire response unit reached the sensor site. The climb was routine, steep but manageable, roughly 80 feet up a broken slope of granite fins and sediment scree. When they reached the plateau, the sensor array had been ripped open, not crushed by a rockfall, not cracked by heat, split, its base peeled apart, bolts scattered, wiring fused into black strands as if it had been licked by flame. And behind it, on the sheer face of the stone wall, 4 gouges, each one 6 feet long, 4 inches deep, perfectly parallel. Granite doesn't break like that, not even with steel tools. You could throw every clawed animal in the North American fossil record at that formation, and not a single one could scratch granite. This wasn't scratching. It was digging. They called in the rest of the team, rangers, geologists, and 2 contracted wildlife specialists from Montana. One of them, a big game tracker with 30 years under his belt, studied the grooves for less than a minute before muttering, "Whatever did this didn't want in. It wanted out." Just below the gouges, scattered in a semicircle, were bones. Not fossilized. Recent. Stripped. Elk, mostly. A few mule deer. Something smaller, possibly a coyote. All of them picked completely clean. But there were no bite marks. No fractures. Not even signs of predation. The bones looked melted, as if some slow acid had dissolved the tissue away, leaving the structure intact but hollowed. Lighter than they should have been. One tech described it as holding a paper model of a skeleton, but there was no chemical residue, no blood trail, no signs of dragging. It was as if the animals had collapsed and then been processed where they fell. They sealed the area, sent samples for analysis. None came back conclusive. And then they found something else. Buried beneath a scattered pile of talus rock, half shattered and almost overlooked, was a ranger helmet. Government issue. Visor half crushed. The nameplate was gone. But inside, tucked against the padding, was a micro SD card from a body camera unit. The last few minutes of the footage survived. The helmet was sent to a secure forensic lab in Laramie. The footage reviewed by Regional Command. Access to the file was later restricted under the Emergency Land Containment Act, Section 19, Unverified Biological Threats. But a technician leaked a description of what he saw. Here's what we know. The footage begins with the camera tilted at a strange angle. The ranger, identity still unconfirmed, is panting, whispering to himself. He's in some kind of cavern. The walls are wet, but not from water. Something darker. The beam from his flashlight reflects back too quickly, like it's bouncing off oil. He mutters, "The shell. Something broke the shell from the inside. It's still warm." The audio pops. A distant growl can be heard, but not in the air. It's coming through the stone itself. He freezes, turns the light toward a wall of rock that looks freshly broken, as if the cave opened recently. He inches forward. The floor crunches. He looks down. More bones, but not just animal. One set is human, a belt still wrapped around the waist, and a name tag, Redfern. The ranger backs up, slowly, and then the growling changes. It becomes a rhythm, a beat, low and deep, like air being dragged through lungs made of gravel. The walls seem to vibrate, and from the darkness ahead, a sound that shouldn't exist underground. Breathing, but not his. The last 2 seconds of the footage are blurred by motion. The ranger turns the camera. By the 3rd week of operations near Crowheart Butte, search and recovery efforts had stopped being about recovery. Everyone knew Redfern wasn't coming back. No one said it. But they didn't have to. There's a look that passes between seasoned rangers, a glance exchanged when the weather is too calm, when the dogs won't move forward, when the silence turns solid. You don't need orders at that point. Instinct knows what command won't say. And out there, in that valley, beneath that ridge, instinct said, "Don't breathe, too loud." The change was subtle at first. It began with the animals. Even the smallest ones, marmots, hares, chickadees, had vanished. No scat, no tracks, no sound. Rangers placed acoustic recorders throughout the sector, hoping to catch signs of nocturnal movement. What they captured instead was a kind of void, an unnatural stretch of nothingness, as if the microphones were deep underwater, recording the absence of life. No chirps, no howls, no movement in the leaves. Only one repeating anomaly, buried beneath the noise floor. A pulse, so low it barely registered, but consistent. One beat every 11.7 seconds. Then came the trees. Veteran fire analysts were the first to notice. The pine needles around the gulch were turning brown despite being in season. Not burnt, Not diseased, just dry, dehydrated from the inside. Several trees appeared to wilt toward the earth like sunflowers collapsing at night. A few had begun bending unnaturally toward a central point no one could trace. Photos from satellites taken just days apart showed patterns in the canopy, like subtle spirals in the trees, all curving inward. Not wind damage, not storm stress, something else. One botanist made the mistake of calling it directional decay. He never filed a follow-up report. Concerned by the terrain shift, Command brought in a specialist, a wildlife tracker from the Navajo Nation. His name was withheld from public record, but internal files referred to him only as the Observer. He arrived quietly. No gear beyond a knife, a walking stick, and a pouch of herbs. Said very little, spoke even less. But the moment his boots touched the tree line, he froze. He bent down, touched the soil with his bare palm, closed his eyes, then turned to the team and said, "This place remembers death." They assumed he meant the standoff at Crowheart centuries ago. He didn't, because when asked to elaborate, he pointed to the line of pine trees just ahead, thick, old growth, and said, "Whatever sleeps beyond those trees is still listening." And then he refused to take a single step further. He camped behind the tree line for 3 nights. On the 4th day, he was gone, left without a word. No footprints, no tire marks, just an offering left in the dirt, a handful of black sand, and a ring of pine needles circling it like a noose. That same night, a member of the search party, unnamed in reports, had a dream. She didn't tell anyone at first, not until she started refusing to sleep outdoors. In her words, "I wasn't dreaming in the forest. I was dreaming under it. I was in the dirt. I could feel the weight of the trees above me. I could hear the roots moving. And something big was looking down through the soil. It didn't have a face, but it had a question, and I knew I was supposed to answer it. I just couldn't understand the language." She woke up with a nosebleed and soil under her fingernails. She hadn't left her tent. That same week, 3 others began reporting night terrors, all with variations of the same theme: burial, breathlessness, and watching eyes that never blinked. One dream ended with the witness standing waist-deep in an empty pit, staring up at themselves. Another ended with a voice whispering a number. 7, 7, 7. No one knew what it meant. Not yet. But later, that number would appear again. Etched into bark, scratched onto a rusted shovel at a closed trailhead, and carved in a perfect circle around a nest of melted bones, each laid out in the shape of a child's spine. The land wasn't silent. It was listening. And the absence of noise? That wasn't nature in retreat. That was something else moving in, taking its place. Because when nature stops, something has to fill that vacuum. And what came next wasn't animal. It wasn't storm or plague or fire. It was a memory with teeth. The ranger who reviewed the camera footage from the crushed helmet said something that didn't make it into the report. He told a colleague, off the record, that just before the feed cut, he heard one final sound. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't footsteps, it was knocking, from inside the mountain 3 times, and then the line went dead. Subscribe to MindFuel. We're not done, because in the next chapter, you'll hear the real final transmission from the second ranger who dared follow Red Fern's trail. What he described over radio wasn't a cave. It was a throat. On the 45th day of the investigation near Crowheart Butte, a seasonal fire crew working containment boundaries came across something half-buried near the dry bed of Bitterroot Creek. At first, they thought it was trash, maybe a sack of old footballs, dumped illegally by a hiker too lazy to pack them out. But the closer they got, the less sense it made. There were 7 of them, scattered across the stream bed like fallen fruit, each one roughly the size of a bowling ball. Some larger, all of them round but asymmetrical, like swollen seed pods hardened in the sun. The outer casing was a dull brown, mottled with fine gray veining and cracks like sun-scorched leather. When touched, the surface had give. Not like eggshell, not like bark, but something in between, warm, flexible, and layered. One ranger said it felt like pressing your thumb into a cured animal hide. But here's where it got worse. Only 4 were intact. The others? Split open, clean, and deliberate. No sign of impact, no scavenging damage, no drag marks in the mud. Just a slow peel from the center outward, each fragment curling back like broken petals. And inside, nothing. That same afternoon, the team brought in Elder Amos Tsali. Again. He had said very little since refusing to enter the pines. This time, he didn't even wait to be asked. The moment he saw the eggs, he turned his back to the group and muttered, "These are not young. They're vessels." Someone asked what he meant. He didn't answer. Not at first. Then, with one hand pressed to the cracked ground, he whispered, "The body is only one part. These things, they don't grow, they arrive." The forestry team flagged the area, set perimeter tape, and called in a biologist from Jackson to run initial assessments. A drone was launched for overhead imaging. It caught something the team on foot had missed. 50 yards uphill, just inside the tree line, was a nest. Not like a bird's nest. This one had structure, concentric rings of disturbed earth. A spiral depression at the center, smoothed down as if something large and heavy had once rested there and then simply stood up and walked away. In the center of that spiral, a single shell fragment, still slick, still wet. That's when the tech team retrieved footage from the nearest trail camera. One mounted to a pine, roughly 12 feet off the ground, infrared equipped. The footage was time-stamped 3:12 a.m. The camera triggers with a soft motion alert. For 7 full seconds, nothing moves. Then, in the far edge of frame, the shell begins to shift. Not crack, not rupture, just bulge. Something inside is testing the membrane, pressing upward, not frantically, but rhythmically, as if it knows exactly how much force to use. Then, without warning, the surface splits with a silent pop, the membrane flaring outward. The thing that emerges is never fully seen, because it moves too fast, a blur, low to the ground, no distinguishable limbs. But the trees shake when it passes through. The camera's infrared lens tries to refocus and fails. What follows is worse. The camera records for another 12 minutes, no additional movement, but in the final frame 1872, the lens catches a shape. Not in the distance, up close, inches from the lens, a single eye, dark, lidless, reflecting nothing, and then black. The team returned to the site at first light. The shell that had shifted on camera? Gone. Only the impression in the dirt remained, hollow, clean, and bone dry, like it had been lifted, not hatched. And at the center of the empty nest, a strand of something fibrous, organic, like cartilage, but pliable, translucent. No animal protein match, no cellular degradation, and the spiral marks in the ground? Now deeper, more defined. They sealed the video under restricted classification. But a junior ranger managed to transcribe the trail cam metadata. There were 7 vessels, 4 hatched, 3 intact. But by morning, all 7 were gone. Elder Tsali left the site before noon. Before he left, he handed the lead investigator something folded in cloth. Not paper, not hide. Bark, peeled, flattened, and scorched with a hot iron. It was a map, a new one. 7 spirals, 1 marked red, 6 still black. Below the spirals was a single line of Cherokee script. They've started to choose ground. When asked what that meant, Sally's final words before vanishing into the trees were, "The shells don't hatch unless they're called, and they've been called from above, not below." Narrator. The forest isn't just reacting anymore, it's preparing, and the things coming out of those shells, they're not young, they're not creatures, they're tools, and something ancient is pulling them into shape, molding them to the surface, one vessel at a time. And once they all wake up, we won't be hunting them. We'll be standing on their nest. Subscribe to MindFuel, because in the next chapter, we play the recovered audio from a ranger's final transmission inside the gulch, and what it says changes everything. 2 days after the discovery of the broken shells, the perimeter around Crowheart Butte changed. No press releases, no official notices, no updated GPS restrictions, but the back roads were suddenly closed, gate chains welded shut overnight, trailheads taped off, not with forestry tape, but with unmarked cordons, zip-tied and patrolled by men who didn't wear ranger green. They wore matte black vests, no insignia, no visible rank. 3 black SUVs rolled into the gulch before sunrise, unplated. Windows tinted so dark the sun bounced off them like mirrors. One of the SUVs carried a sealed case, the kind used for biohazard containment or military cryptography. The other 2 carried no visible cargo, only observers. Not scientists, not law enforcement. Something else. They didn't ask questions. They gave instructions. All personnel involved in the Bitterroot sector were handed new paperwork, revised incident reports, retitled logs, asset redeployment forms. Every page bore the same heading: United States Interior Geologic Anomaly Response Division, Classification Protocol. 19G, Mineral Collapse and Unstable Sediment Displacement. That's what they were told to call it. Mineral collapse. Not a disappearance. Not a biological hazard. Not an emergence. Sheriff Tom Lancer of Fremont County, who had originally flagged the missing person report on Ranger Redfern, was pulled into a 2-hour meeting with one of the men from the SUVs. After that meeting, the sheriff stopped returning press inquiries. He stopped issuing statements altogether. When a journalist from Casper News Service requested a public comment on the region's closures, the department issued a 2-line statement. Recent shifts in regional terrain have rendered the area unstable. Please respect all restricted boundaries for your safety. And that was it. But someone didn't stay silent. A junior ranger, whose name has since been redacted, managed to leak a fragment of the internal trail footage taken on day 47. It was shot on a helmet cam. Poor quality, blurry, time-stamped 3:03 a.m. What it showed lasted 9 seconds. 9 seconds that were never supposed to be seen. The footage begins with darkness, then a rapid movement of brush. The helmet is jostling. Whoever's wearing it is either backing up or on the ground. Then a tree comes into focus. The side of it has deep gouges, but not straight. Circular, almost as if something wrapped around it. Then something moves. Far left frame, low to the ground, too long to be a person, too fast to be a bear. Then a shape. Humanoid, but only just. The arms are wrong, bent the wrong way at the elbows, and it's dragging something, not in front of it, behind. But here's the detail that stops you cold. It's crawling backward. Head twisted toward the camera, legs splayed wide, moving on all fours, but in reverse, as if being pulled or following something invisible. The eyes shine too bright, not in reflection, in projection. And then, cut. The footage was passed through a private server, from there to a Reddit thread that was removed within minutes. Copies were scrubbed, accounts deleted, comments locked, but not before 3 still frames were archived. The figure's face is blurry, distorted by motion, but even in the distortion, the jaw appears unhinged, not in pain, not broken, adapted, like it had been restructured for a different kind of movement, a different kind of environment. That same night, fire spotters at a ridge tower 20 miles northeast reported lights in the valley. Not lanterns, not flares, rings, circles of pulsing light that moved through the trees with no visible source. They shifted, like bioluminescent tide pools, then vanished all at once. When they radioed it in, they were told to log it as atmospheric mirage. But no one had ever seen mirages cast shadows. Within 72 hours of the suppression order, all surveillance feeds went dark. All trail cams pulled, acoustic monitors removed, field teams reassigned or dismissed without debriefing. The few who stayed behind stopped talking. They didn't just act afraid, they acted watched, as if somewhere inside that forest, beyond the marked pines, something now recognized them, as if it had studied their patterns, their breathing, their language. You don't need to chase legends when legends come walking. And now, the government isn't just covering up what lives beneath the butte. They're trying to contain what it sent forward. The vessels were only phase 1. Now, the shapes have learned to stand. And in the next chapter, you'll hear the final broadcast from the repeater tower before the Ranger went dark. Not the words, but what answered him. Subscribe to MindFuel, because we're not reporting disappearances anymore. We're documenting adaptation, and the next evolution is already among us. The shells, the vanished Rangers, the black SUVs that never announced themselves, they weren't the beginning. They were the reawakening of something the government already knew was there. Because hidden in a declassified memo, retrieved through a Freedom of Information Act request, submitted in 2019, was a file almost no one was supposed to see. Its header? Project. Hollow Sky Classification Level. Majestic 12, Clearance Only Date. Opened August 14th, 1983. The contents. A containment protocol. For what the military then referred to as subterranean geomorphic irregularities, a sanitized phrase that means exactly nothing. But one page deeper, the language becomes less vague. Phenomenon displays non-biological locomotion patterns, able to displace physical material without excavation, unresponsive to standard reconnaissance systems. Interior terrain may be shaped according to behavioral stimuli. In plain terms, something down there, not alive in the way we understand, but very much aware, and constantly restructuring its environment. The project began in the Wind River Range, exactly 37 miles from the Crowheart Butte. Back then, it wasn't a recovery mission, it was an insertion. 12 men, Army Corps of Engineers, Special Reconnaissance, linguistic experts, 1 archaeologist. Equipped with seismic drills, subterranean comms relays, and a custom winch platform designed to reach depths of up to 2,000 feet. Initial reports described a hollow cavity beneath the rock shelf, over 600 meters wide. Smooth walls, no sediment, no natural water table. But here's the part that never made it into the geology records. There were steps, carved, evenly spaced, descending far beyond the light range of their halogen rigs and etched into the wall at the entrance. Symbols, not Latin, not cuneiform, not runes. But a match was found in a 1930s academic paper out of Chapel Hill, referencing a pre-contact Cherokee dialect believed to have been lost for over 300 years. The last known radio contact from that team came 72 hours later, a garbled transmission from lead recon officer Harlan Voss. 3 words, barely audible over static. It's still building. And then nothing. No ping. No emergency beacon. No signal bounce from the lower relays. The cavity swallowed them. All 12 declared KIA. Project Hollow Sky was shuttered, buried under 5 layers of bureaucratic rerouting. Anyone who asked was told it was a failed mine survey. But 14 years later, one man resurfaced. A remote hospital in Missouri. An unidentified male admitted with signs of long-term malnutrition and chronic light sensitivity. No ID, no record of arrival. Non-verbal, covered in shallow scar tissue along the spine, hands, and behind both ears, suggesting exposure to low-frequency vibration over time. He didn't respond to English, he didn't respond to Spanish. But when a nurse from Cherokee descent passed by his room, he began to speak, slowly, haltingly, fluent Cherokee. She said he wasn't speaking like someone learning the language. He was speaking it like someone born to it, with dialects not heard since the Trail of Tears. Phrases that predated the printed syllabary. When a linguist was brought in to translate, the man repeated the same phrase over and over. I saw it breathe. When asked what it was, his voice cracked and he wept. He was later identified through dental records as Specialist Aaron Trujillo, one of the original 12 sent underground in 1983. He hadn't aged a day. That was the last anyone saw of him. 3 days later, his hospital room was found empty. No signs of struggle. Security footage from the entire wing wiped clean. The only frame left intact was a still shot of Trujillo standing barefoot at the end of the hallway. Eyes wide, face tilted upward, mouth open like he was listening, not to something in the room, to something beneath it. The Hollow Sky documents were never formally released, but a whistleblower who provided copies to independent researchers left one note handwritten in the margins of the final file. It's not about what's under the mountain, it's about what the mountain is trying to become. And now, we're seeing signs that the same pattern of activity has resumed, except this time it's not underground. This time, the environment is reacting above the surface. Trees bending, soil collapsing, sky humming, and every week another vessel is found, cracked open, emptied, used, subscribed to MindFuel. Because in the next chapter, we examine the old military blueprints that were never meant to surface, maps that show chambers spreading out like roots under the entire Wind River range, and what appears to be a central stem, a throat, a passage, a way up. On day 53 of operations at Crowheart Butte, a controlled blast was set against the south face of the gulch, meant to stabilize a landslide zone just beneath the ridgeline. It was routine. It wasn't supposed to reveal anything. But when the dust cleared, it was there. Not a tunnel, not a mine, a door. Hidden behind a section of stone shaped too smooth to be natural, capped by ridged carvings that arced across the entire face like a crescent. It wasn't sealed with cement, it wasn't bricked shut. It was sealed with pressure. A membrane of stone barely held in place until the charge breathed it open. And carved across the opening were symbols, hundreds of them, chiseled deep into the inner rock. Symbols older than any known tribal language. The Cherokee elder called them warnings, not words, not stories, just shapes, to stop you from entering. A team of 5 descended into the breach, 3 rangers, 1 geologist, and a fire marshal tasked with documenting structural hazards. They radioed in at 1812. That was their last confirmed contact. The audio was recorded, and at first, it's uneventful. Echoes, boot falls, a few murmured comments about air quality. Then one of them says something strange. The rock's humming. Another responds, no, that's not the rock. That's under the rock. 30 meters in, the tunnel opens into a cavern. There is no ceiling, just darkness vanishing into a black dome. And across the cavern floor, shells, not dozens, hundreds. Some glowing faintly from within, like the last flicker of coals in a dead hearth. Others fully intact, still damp, still pulsing. Their outer skin taut, as though pressure was mounting inside. And then there were the split ones, dozens of them, peeled open, empty, their contents scattered or missing entirely. Fragments of hardened membrane stuck to the floor like scales. But no blood, not even footprints, only movement. The geologist described it over the comms, not directly, not visually, but in sound. Something was moving between the shells, but that they couldn't see it. Not because of distance, not because of speed, because it wasn't reflecting anything. No light, no heat, not even sound when it passed by. It was shadow-made animate, sensed only in the instant after it moved, like memory left behind in the corner of the eye. They swung their flashlights toward it, and every beam died. At 1827, the radio crackled. A sharp gasp, heavy breathing, static, then a scream. Male, close range, cut off midway, not by distance, by something else. The channel went silent. Then a sound came through, low, repetitive, a clicking rhythm, not Morse, not any known code, but familiar to the elder who later heard the playback. He said it mimicked a burial chant once whispered in the dark of death lodges, meant to guide the soul down so the body wouldn't rise. Except this one was being played backward. Backup teams arrived 12 minutes later. The cavern entrance remained open, undisturbed, but inside, no team, no shells, not a single one, just an echo, a single word spoken without breath. Below, repeated once, and never again. A sensor planted at the tunnel's threshold picked up something peculiar over the next 6 hours. A vibration pattern, pulsing outward from the earth, like laughter, if stone could laugh. And at 3:03 a.m., the sensor stopped. But not before capturing one final spike in the air. A shape, brief, but unmistakable. A human outline, upside down, like it had been pulled toward the cavern from below, like something wasn't climbing up, but reaching. Subscribe to MindFuel. Because this isn't a myth unearthed. It's an environment rewiring itself. One shell, one scream, one forgotten language at a time. And in the next chapter, we follow the old water maps, tracing the arteries beneath Crowheart Butte that were never rivers at all, but veins. You expect monsters to come with noise, footsteps, growls, cries in the night. But the thing stalking Crowheart now, it doesn't approach, it subtracts. And it began quietly. A ranger forgot his partner's name. That happens. Long hours, stress, fatigue. Maybe he was dehydrated until the second ranger, the one he'd forgotten, never showed up to shift check, and the logs had no mention of him. Not in writing, not in roster, not on the security footage from the morning before. It was like he had never been assigned to the team at all. And yet, the ranger still had a photo, a Polaroid, torn at the edge, 2 men in uniform, one of them smiling, the second man's face smudged. Not blacked out, not faded, just missing. It didn't stop there. By the end of the week, 3 other survivors, those still working cleanup and containment, began reporting similar lapses. Names forgotten, tools misplaced in their own hands. One woman stared at a tree for nearly half an hour, trying to remember if it had always been there. And then there was the journal, found tucked beneath a cot in cabin 9. No name on the cover, just a single phrase scratched into the inside flap. You won't remember writing this, but it's still true. The next several pages were blank, torn, blackened at the corners, but halfway through, a message reappeared in thick pencil strokes. Leave, while you still remember the way out. The handwriting matched that of Ranger Elias Granger, a man still stationed at the outpost. When confronted, he stared at the journal, then shook his head. That's not mine. I've never seen it before. I don't even use pencils. Then, someone asked Granger what year he started. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, because he couldn't. He forgot the year, then the month, then his supervisor's name. By morning, he didn't recognize the outpost. He sat on his bunk and wept. When asked why, he only said, "There's something missing in my mouth. A word. I used to know it. I think it meant home." He was flown out the next day, but not before the Cherokee elder asked to see him one last time. Granger stood before the old man, confused, searching. The elder just looked at him and whispered, "The ones born in the dark eat memory first." Elder Charlie had warned them of this. He called them the forgotten teeth, creatures that do not kill, not at first. They remove context, the frame of self. They take your place in the pattern so you don't notice when you've been moved. You stop recognizing your own voice. You lose the path back until all that's left is a face someone else forgets. And in that forgetting, they grow stronger. Because without memory, nothing resists. Not logic, not instinct, not fear. Teams started marking their arms with permanent ink. Names, dates, coordinates, anything to keep them rooted. One ranger carved his father's name into the inside of his boot just to have something that would remind him why he was real. But even that wasn't safe. Because when the boots went missing, he couldn't remember who Dad even was. In one of the few remaining logs before the site was fully locked down, there's a recorded entry from an outpost medic. She was tasked with daily cognitive checks. The entry reads, "3 more forgot their own faces today. One called his reflection by another name. I asked who that person was. He said, 'That's who I used to be, before I felt the hunger.'" She was relieved from duty 3 days later. No reason given. Her signature was on none of her reports, just a redacted placeholder, labeled "Unverified Civilian Asset Disassociated." A final note was scrawled onto the supply room chalkboard by an unknown hand. You'll never know what they took, only that something's missing. Subscribe to MindFuel, because what's happening beneath Crowheart isn't just physical, it's psychological, it's cellular, it's existential. And in the next chapter, the search teams stumble upon something buried in the deeper chamber walls. Not a creature, not a door, but a window that doesn't show the outside. It shows what watches from inside. He appeared just after sunset, staggering out of the trees at the edge of a remote filling station 20 miles east of Crowheart Butte. No vehicle, no shoes. His clothes torn open down the back, caked with dried blood. His face was blank, lips cracked, eyes wide, like someone pulled too far from the sound of his own name. And when the attendant asked if he was hurt, he whispered something, so softly they almost didn't catch it. "It's not supposed to be out here." When they tried to sit him down, he grabbed the edge of the counter and repeated it, over and over. "They let one out. They let one out. It's bigger than the rest." He was transported to a private emergency clinic under law enforcement supervision. He didn't resist, didn't speak again for 5 hours, until the attending nurse tried to clean a wound on his shoulder. The moment the gauze touched skin, he screamed, but not in pain, in warning. "You're washing away the mark," he said. "That's how it sees you. That's how it remembers you." No one knew what he meant, until they checked the skin beneath the blood. Carved just under the surface, layered into the scar tissue, was a glyph, an exact match to the same symbols found above the cracked shell site, etched in loops, meant to contain, or to signal. They hadn't let him out. He'd escaped, and he wasn't the only one watching. Because that same night, drone footage was collected by an environmental surveyor scanning damage near the landslide basin. The drone was equipped with LiDAR mapping, set to fly 400 feet above the ridge line, just west of the breach point. The flight was meant to record geological shifts. What it caught was movement beneath the ground. The drone's downward sensor began picking up pressure waves, oscillations in the sand and soil that moved too consistently to be tectonic. Then the LiDAR captured it. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough. A shape. 12 feet tall, roughly humanoid in proportion, but elongated. Limbs uneven, the torso too narrow, the head angled backward as if permanently pulled by unseen weight. And it wasn't walking. It was gliding, beneath the surface, moving effortlessly through packed sediment like a shark beneath water, stirring no dust, leaving no tunnel, just a wake. A quiet ripple of disturbed land, stretching nearly half a mile. The drone lost connection 47 seconds later, not to signal interference, to magnetics. Every onboard sensor fried at once. The feed ends on a single, frozen frame, a ridge of disturbed soil, arcing like a dorsal fin, moving straight toward the outpost. When the footage was recovered, the elder was brought in again. He said only this: "That is not one of the many. That is one of the first. The old ones. They do not nest. They do not wait. They remember." Ranger units were pulled from the site within 24 hours, but not because of protocol, because of the ground itself. The soil had begun to shift overnight, sinking in slow patterns. Perfect circles, like the blast radius from some unseen pulse. And from above, those patterns matched a carving found on the bark-wrapped map Sali had once given to the investigators. A spiral, open at the end, a mouth. Not opening, finishing. So now the questions aren't, what are they? Or, why here? Now the question is, what did they keep buried for so long? And why is it no longer staying down? And what if the man who wandered back out of the forest isn't lucky? What if he wasn't a survivor? What if he was sent? Subscribe to MindFuel. Because in the next chapter, the surveillance array picks up something impossible. A voice. It doesn't speak any known language, but it knows your name. The elder left at dawn, didn't pack, didn't speak to anyone, just walked out of the ranger station before the sun had breached the far ridgeline, wrapped in a wool blanket, eyes down, lips moving in rhythm to a chant no one had heard before. He didn't say goodbye, but he left behind a single message, scrawled into the dust of the cabin floor. 7 words. They don't nest for survival. They nest to multiply. That was 3 days before the federal lockdown. Crowheart Butte is now officially listed as a geologically unstable fault corridor. All maps reissued, access roads sealed, airspace rerouted under the guise of wildfire containment. Every ranger reassigned or debriefed into silence. The files? Buried deeper than the Hollow Sky archive. But one thing couldn't be buried: the movement. Because even after the site was sealed, the monitoring equipment, illegally left behind by a rogue technician, continued to record. And the vibrations? They didn't stop. They spread. The final transmission in the Ranger network came from a secondary outpost in Beaverhead National Forest, just across the border into Montana. A motion alert had triggered on a sensor calibrated for wildlife. The ranger on duty, Logan Mears, was drinking coffee, reviewing camera feeds, bored. Until the alert came with 2 words he hadn't seen before. Vertical breach. He radioed the field unit. No response. So he accessed the live sensor log. The data showed subsurface movement, slow but rising, just beneath Maverick Gulch, an area thought dormant since the last glacial shift. Then, the screen flashed red. Surface integrity compromised. And the camera, mounted on a high pine above the ravine, twitched. For a moment, all that could be seen was dust. Then, something emerged. No silhouette, no limbs, just motion. The kind that doesn't rise. The kind that erupts. Seismic data confirmed the reading 5 minutes later. Depth origin, 600 meters. Displacement radius, 1.3 miles. Trajectory, outward. Whatever had grown beneath Crowheart Butte had seeded itself. Not in one place. Not in one species. In the land. And now that land had opened again. Farther north, in a forest never touched by Project Hollow Sky, which means the pattern isn't local, it's systemic. In the final frame of the Montana feed, just before static consumed the transmission, Ranger Mears can be heard muttering one final phrase. It's not just coming up, it's already under us. So this is the end of the file, but not the story. The ground didn't split by accident. The shells didn't open on their own. And the figures rising from the dirt aren't escaping. They're advancing. The nest wasn't isolated. It was just the first to hatch. Subscribe to MindFuel, because the forest you think you know may already be remembering you. And this isn't where it ends. This is where it begins again.